And now, insurance-minded speeches from Geico.
It's a common expression, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. However, what if the horse's mouth is filled with useful insurance tools? This is the exact case with the Geico app. Yes, the app is free and therefore a gift horse. However, look inside the app and behold, emergency roadside assistance, digital ID cards, bill pay. Get the Geico app. Look it in the mouth. Get amazing services. Thank you.
Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Within the Chaos
with your host,
Rodney Shortridge,
and co-host,
Robin Dalton.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by going to blogtalkradio.com/within the chaos, or you can call in to listen in or to ask any questions to our guest at 323-870-4197. From deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you again for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge. I'll be your host tonight, along with my fiery redhead co-host, Robin Dalton.
Hey, y'all.
Tonight, our special guest is Bishop Bryan Ouellette. Bishop Ouellette is a semi-retired Eastern Orthodox Western Catholic bishop and exorcist for the Old Roman Catholic Sacred Order of St. Michael and Archangel Order of Exorcists. So, Robin, how was your week?
Well, my week was very, very emotionally challenged. I'm kind of contemplating and battling my demons this week with, I don't know, doing what I do. You know, you get trained and educated on provide for people and take care of people, and you take care of their every need and health issues, but you don't get prepared for when you lose someone. And we lost a client, and we have another one having health issues, and it has just made me question if I can do this. I'm serious.
It's a hard job. I know, Mom did it for 25 years, and I got a couple aunts done it, and you get attached to these people, which you can't help it. It's human nature, but when they pass away, it's like losing a friend or a loved one.
Yeah, it's been rough.
I'm sorry about that.
But, I guess I'm just going to have to, try to separate it a little bit. But it's hard when you're with the same people 16 hours a day, taking care of their every need. So, but the good outweighs the bad, so I'll quit complaining.
Well, you're not complaining. It's just part of life. We live, we die. I mean, pretty simple.
Yeah, so anyone who's listening that prays, just keep my work family in your prayers and send out good thoughts and vibes. It's been a rough week for everybody there.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to my family. We lost a cousin of mine Saturday. He's 48 years old. His name was Alan Smith, and it kind of caught everybody by surprise. And so, yeah, it's been a rough week on both sides, I guess, for a lot of people. And my heart and thoughts goes out with them. So, you ready for Thanksgiving?
I'm always ready for Thanksgiving. I'm always ready for food.
I know. I've been fasting for like a week. I'm ready to dig into some food, some turkey.
Yeah, we're going to. I'm going to have me a little dinner here, and then I have to go to work, and we're going to have a dinner there for our clients. So I'll get double stuffed.
So yeah, you'll be walking around complaining then. Lord, I'm stuffed.
I know. I'll be like, oh God, I'm going to explode. I got food, baby.
Well, that's enough. That's bull crap. And I'm real excited about our guest tonight. I want to talk about exorcism. I hope you don't mind because I'm going to dive right into this. So it's my honor to welcome our special guest again, Bishop Bryan Ouellette. Hello, Bishop. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you coming on. I've been looking for someone with your expertise to come on the show for a while, and then when I looked up the St. Michael of Archangels, I was like, there are some people that can help me out.
We try to do our best, Bishop, I mean, it's an interesting work. That's all I can say.
That's what I want to find out tonight. Whatever you can tell us. So can you tell us about yourself first off?
Yeah, certainly. I started in this work. Was really sort of an accident, to be honest. I started out my ministry as an independent thinker. So I originally was a Roman Catholic seminarian many years ago, and through the course of the process of discernment, as it's called in the Roman Catholic tradition, which is that process of trying to figure out the nature of your vocation, whether or not you have a valid calling to become a priest. I went through that with the Diocese of Palm Beach, Florida, and was accepted into the program, and went to seminary for a very short period of time. And then I realized that there was more going on with my vocation than I could fully realize in the capacity that I was set up with. So I left seminary. I went and put myself through university, studied psychology, and then eventually education and philosophy. Again, a lot went on with my different explorations of spirituality. I left the church for a period of time, actually became a Buddhist, studied Buddhism and practiced Buddhism for many years, which is still a very strong foundation to my own spirituality. But eventually felt called back to the church, and at this point I had already been married, so the idea of being able to go and become a Roman Catholic priest was more or less out of the question, just because without the requirements of celibacy just sort of preclude being able to become a Roman Catholic priest at that point. So I did return to the church, but the yearning to go back into ministry was too strong. And so I had to figure out a way to respond to this calling. And I went to met a Ruthenian Eastern Catholic priest, and he had told me that he felt that I was one of those people who were being called to both married life and priesthood. Unfortunately, there was no vehicle within the red tape of the Vatican to allow for someone like that, who had a vocation to both. I mean, it's very difficult in order to, to be accepted as a Roman Catholic priest and be married at the same time. It does happen, but not the way that it happened to me. You would have to have gone about it a different way than I did. So long story short, I eventually started exploring the independent sacramental movement, and found, tried different churches, eventually found one that worked for me, something that, understood my vocation, the nature of my vocation, the things that I wanted to do with it. And in the course of the development of the vocation through that process, eventually was ordained to the priesthood, then consecrated a bishop. And then at that point, we established with the people that I had been working with, which was a sort of a collaboration of Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox and some independent Catholics as well. The Holy Nicolean Catholic tradition was established. And so this started out as an esoteric monastic church. It was not very big, but it just had mostly solitary practitioners who wanted to enhance their understanding of mysticism within the context of the esoteric Christian tradition. And that worked for many years. But as we continued to develop ourselves and made more of a name for ourselves, we realized that we were being called, the church as a whole was being called towards active ministry, that this semi-monastic life, which was very suitable to the clergy in the church, there were people who needed us, who are disenfranchised by the canonical system, did not feel welcomed by Roman Catholicism. Perhaps they were former Catholics, maybe they were Protestants or non-denominational Christians who just felt called or felt an affiliation to the more ancient liturgical traditions that are represented by Catholicism and Orthodoxy, but not really being able to make that conversion because, again, the processes of conversion can be difficult and daunting to somebody and a little bit intimidating. And so we were finding that there were a lot of people like this who wanted to just come to an ancient liturgical church, to experience Catholicism, to have valid sacraments, but not have to go through all the hoops that the canonical churches make you jump through. And so we started to work with people on more of a pastoral level, and we found that people started coming to us that were in deep spiritual crises, who had been rejected by, again, the canonical churches, because they were not either they were not Catholic or Orthodox or whatever church they approached was not willing to work with them because they were not a member of that denomination and had not been established within that denomination. But yet they were still in spiritual crisis and left to their own devices. They had no idea what to do. So they came to us because, the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church is a very open system. We do follow a very traditional theology and a very traditional methodology, but we are very, very open, and more or less, all Christians are welcome. Actually, all people are welcome to participate in our life, but in order to participate in the sacramental life of the church, you need to be baptized. That's the only requirement. We don't try to, force you into some type of conversion. We don't care about denominations. Denominations mean nothing to us. So this was very helpful for these individuals who found themselves in spiritual crises. They felt that they were, some of them felt that they were under a demonic attack. And so the church, being a sacramental church with valid apostolic succession, we were obligated to handle this for this individual, and we did, and we handled it successfully. And then we found that more people were coming to us. And at that point, I decided, as the presiding bishop of this church, maybe we needed to take a more formal step forward in helping people that are in this type of spiritual limbo, this spiritual crisis where no one's helping them and that no one knows what to do. And so we did. I started researching rather than reinvent the wheel and come up with, an exorcism or deliverance ministry. I decided to see what was out there in the independent sacramental movement. Since we were, among those churches, maybe we could find somebody that was compatible with us and we could team up. And so I found the Order of Exorcists. I spoke with Archbishop Ron File, who was the founder of the Order of Exorcists, Sacred Order of St. Michael the Archangel. And we instantly had a connection in that regard. And I told him, I said, I've got some time that I can devote to this. And, I really think that this would be, beneficial to both of our organizations. Order of Exorcists is a 501c3, as is the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church. So we formed a collaboration between his organization and mine. And so at that point, we found ourselves in the exorcism business, and so we started taking cases, and we set up our website so that people could find us. And right now, as it stands, we're getting about 12 to 15. We have about 12 to 15 open cases. We get about 2 or 3 cases a week on average. Some weeks are a little bit light, some weeks are heavier, but that's about the average. And I handle the Atlanta, Georgia divisions for the Order of Exorcists. There's different divisions around the world. We operate in more than 20 countries and more than 40 states. But clergy is quite light. We don't have as many clergy as we need to really service the ministry in a better way than we are now. So we're always hoping that we can recruit new members, particularly ordained clergy who have the the blessing of their bishop to participate in this type of ministry, and then we try to install them in their home location so that they can take over that division. So I handle about a 2-hour driving radius around the center of downtown Atlanta, Georgia. Sometimes we do extend outside of that jurisdiction, but in order to do that, we have to request donations that will cover the expenses of the team to go on an investigation that's out of our area. Outside of that, though, any cases that we see within our jurisdiction, it's completely free of charge. We don't ask for any money. It is a donation system. I mean, we operate, the entire organization operates exclusively off of donations. So, we always need them, and we're always very grateful when somebody decides to give to our cause. But we will help a person whether or not they can donate, and we don't, like I said, we never ask for money when we do this work. It's strictly free of charge, and we work with them until the problem is resolved. And that's the big difference between us and all these other organizations out there who get into paranormal investigation. You can go online and you can type in paranormal investigators, and you're going to get this plethora of organizations that pop up, these groups all over the place. But the fact of the matter is, these people are more interested in entertaining themselves. A lot of them are into paranormal investigation as a hobby. Some of them get into it because they want to do research and prove that ghosts exist, and they want to have access to active locations so that they can do this research. None of that applies to the Order of Exorcists. We are here to help people in spiritual crisis, whether it be a classic haunting or a demonic infestation, whether it be somebody who is spiritually disturbed in some way, or whether it be somebody who is genuinely possessed. We are here to investigate what the problem is and fix it for them, and we will stick with that client until it is fixed. So, that's it's a calling, it's a ministry, and it's, I think, quite unique because, to my knowledge, there's really no one out there that's doing this, and really we need more people who are willing to do this because spiritual crisis is a greater problem than people realize.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like with us. We had our spiritual advisor just retired, and now we're needing to find a new one, and it's hard to find anyone in this area who's willing to help.
It's true. I would try to install a new division in New York. We wanted to have one based in New York City because we were getting a lot of investigation requests up there. A lot of intake forms were coming in from the New York City area. And so I have some members of the church that are up there and were willing to help, but they're lay people and not clergy. And so they were talking to clergy that they knew in the area to see if they would be willing to be at least a contact, maybe not going on every investigation, maybe not even being completely affiliated with the order, but somebody that my division up there could contact in the event that there was a need for either a house blessing or an exorcism or something else that only a priest can provide. And nobody wanted to touch this work with a 10-foot pole. A lot of them are afraid. And I think that's due to inexperience and just basically a lack of understanding as to what's involved and an innate fear of evil, which is natural. It'd be a little bit strange if you said that you didn't have some apprehension getting involved with something that could be potentially demonic. So I attribute it to that. But we do wish we had more courageous individuals coming forward to help us with this work, and because we need it. There's just not enough people out there doing this.
Well, are there any people that in your life that influenced you to become a bishop, to do this work in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting how I became a bishop because that was never my goal. I always I always felt called the priesthood. So, whether or not I was pursuing marriage, which I did at one point in my life, and still happily married to this day, I only really ever wanted to just become a priest and service a basic priesthood, not necessarily demonic investigation or exorcism ministry, just basic pastoral ministry. It was, I some of my colleagues that I was working with at the time that I was pursuing this vocation wanted me to take on the task of running a church that they had established. They wanted me as the head of the church, and I explained to them that I'm not qualified because, first of all, at that point, I wasn't a priest, let alone a bishop, and one would need to be a bishop in order to operate a sacramental church like that. And so that particular individual wanted me to see what I could do about speaking to the bishop that I was working with about whether or not he felt that I had the charism that is required, the grace, the gift of grace that's required to receive the episcopacy, because that's not just something that you just choose somebody randomly and then bestow it upon them. There has to be a calling to that as well. So it's not just a calling to ministerial life, but the level of ministerial life that you will serve in is also a vocation that needs to be discerned. And so I was apprehensive about becoming a bishop. I never really wanted to be involved in the administrative aspects of it. But it turned out that that's the direction it went, and it happened quite naturally. So both the people that I was working with, my colleagues at the time, that were in the early stages of this ministry, as well as my own bishop who consecrated me, felt that there was enough evidence there to suggest that the episcopacy is what I was actually being called to. So after I received the consecration to bishop, that's when we became far more active, and I started taking on the role of running different churches. At one point I was running 3. Now 2 of them are inactive, and I basically spend all of my time now working with the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church. That's the primary church, and that one is extremely active here in Atlanta in particular.
Well, what exactly, could you explain to everyone then, what exactly is the old Roman Catholic Sacred Order of St. Michael the Archangel?
Absolutely. Let's start off by talking a little bit about what old Roman Catholicism is, because some people are not completely familiar with that. And, that's, it's different. What it basically is back in the 1800s, there was some disputes over some theological issues that were being tossed around the turn of the century, and eventually it led to a schism in Europe, where some Roman Catholic bishops refused to go along with the new mandates of the Roman Catholic Church. One of those mandates was papal infallibility. They didn't like the idea of it because that prior to this statement that the Pope at the time had made, papal infallibility was not a tenet of the faith. It never had been. And now, all of a sudden, the faithful were being asked to accept that when the Pope speaks de fide, when he speaks from the chair, ex cathedra, then what it excuse me, what it amounts to is that it is as if God is speaking. It's infallible. The teaching that comes from that type of statement is infallibly true, and they did not accept that. They would not accept that particular doctrine. And there were a few other things that were going on at the time, that were causing issue as well. But these bishops broke away, and then over time they became known as the Old Roman Catholics because they were part of the. And I'm really being very general with the history here. It's a lot more complex than I'm giving you, but I'm just kind of giving you a basic idea as to where this comes from. And so these bishops started consecrating their own bishops without the authority of Rome. So essentially, in the Roman Catholic Church, in order to consecrate a new bishop, the Pope has to give his blessing on that. So when these bishops started consecrating bishops themselves without the papal authority, then that was when the schism was complete. And so those bishops started consecrating their own bishops, and soon after that, an entirely independent Catholic Church was formed. And some of those started to come up with new theologies over the next several decades, and they established their own churches. And so, in short, the independent sacramental movement was born out of this one schism. And so now we have a whole series of independent bishops or autocephalous bishops that are not under the authority of the Roman Catholic Church, but have valid apostolic succession and thus have valid holy orders to operate as a Catholic, but not necessarily as a Roman Catholic. And so to distinguish the difference, they call the old Roman Catholics the ones that broke away, who never agreed with those changes, and the Roman Catholic Church is the large canonical church that's under the Vatican today. So this gives us a special opportunity because we don't have the red tape that the Roman Catholic Church has. We don't have to deal with the Vatican and all of their rules and regulations. We can simplify it because we're a smaller church, and we don't have the obligation to fulfill these very complicated canons that are not part of our tradition. So the old Roman Catholic Church came to America, and they were all over the world. And Archbishop Ron File was one of a Roman, was running an old Roman Catholic parish in California when he started receiving requests from Roman Catholics to investigate potential possessions that were occurring in his community. And the Roman Catholic Church wouldn't look at them, but he did. And over time, word got out about this. And this was back in the late 70s. And word got out about it, and eventually he converted his parish into the Order of Exorcists and started to take on other independent Catholic clergy who were part of their own traditions or part of different old Roman Catholic parishes. Sometimes there's even different jurisdictions within the old Roman Catholic system. And he created a sort of an affiliation process. And so we have now started to work on establishing an intercommunion between all of the organizations and churches that are part of this Order of Exorcists, because we do have different groups involved that are not under the same jurisdiction, and it's grown into a relatively large organization, mostly made up of lay people, and they are lay investigators. They do not perform exorcisms. The lay people cannot perform exorcisms, or at least they shouldn't. Although I do hear of times where that happens, but it does not happen in the Order of Exorcists. We are a very traditional Catholic order, and one must have the grace of the priesthood in order to perform exorcism. But that's what it means. The old Roman Catholic Order of Exorcists. It's completely independent of the Vatican, but it is 100% Catholic.
Okay.
So what is the purpose of an exorcism?
Well, exorcism is more or less healing. It's a healing ministry, It's for extreme cases of spiritual crises, which can be referred to in 4 different stages of development. And we should probably talk a little bit about what those stages are. There is the first stage, which is something that we all experience as human beings living in this world, which is what I call demonic interference. And this is when one is compelled in a time of weakness to commit a sin that could be severe. It might not always be, but in many cases it can be. And so the inclination to sin is part of the interference that we experience on a spiritual level that comes in part from what is known in the church as the demonic realm. And so this would be something that everyone experiences. Everyone has experienced a temptation to do wrong, knowing that they shouldn't be doing wrong, but they do it anyway. That is a common part of human experience, and that would be the first stage of a demonic involvement. Then the more extreme stages is where we would need to get in and start looking at the potential for exorcism. So the second stage is what we call demonic obsession. Now, demonic obsession is very difficult to distinguish between an actual, genuine demonic obsession or mental illness. And so in a lot of cases, what looks like a demonic obsession is actually a mental illness, or a mental diagnosis is more appropriate than saying this person's under the influence of a demonic entity. And sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes the person has been seeking psychiatric help and it has not been working. They can progressively get worse, and their problem is actually demonic in nature and is not related to mental health. But the real challenge is that usually they coexist. So if a person has a genuine demonic attachment, then there are going to be psychological and psychiatric consequences to that attachment, and vice versa. If a person has a psychiatric or psychological weakness, then that is often utilized by the demonic realm to attack that person, and it can progress into more serious stages of involvement. But at the demonic obsession level, what we're seeing essentially is an increased physical illness that can't be identified. They go to the doctors a lot, and the doctor doesn't know what's wrong. They've usually been on all sorts of different medication, and nothing works. They've tried different treatments, nothing works, and they're not sure what's going on. The family, when you talk to them, will often say that, yeah, there's something wrong with them, but they're not sure what. And at this stage, there typically isn't enough evidence from the external side of things to determine that there is something paranormal taking place, because that's what we want to look for in order to be able to distinguish the difference between pure mental illness and a spiritual problem like a demonic obsession, because there will be typically, in demonic cases, there will be paranormal activity associated with the obsession, or the third stage more commonly we'll see it, and that is known as demonic oppression. So at demonic oppression, this is where the person is clearly disturbed, and the family starts to feel the presence of something dark and evil in the environment. And so at the demonic oppression stage, you will start to see severe physical illnesses, great physical suffering, aggression, difficulty maintaining relationships, difficulties at work, lots of anger, and it will not resolve through traditional treatment. That's the one key factor, is that the more they go to doctors, the more they're compliant with their treatment plan, the sicker they get. Yet, when somebody prays for them or the church intercedes on their behalf through the sacramental life that the church possesses, then they improve. And so this is one of the other things that we look for, to be able to identify the difference between what is a common mental illness and what is a less common demonic attack. And the last stage, the fourth stage, would be considered demonic possession, which is when a person is either partially or completely has either partially or completely lost their control of their body, where the demonic presence has integrated itself into the mind of the victim, and they will lose their ability to control themselves, and then that's when you'll start to see very severe paranormal events, like the ability to speak in unknown languages, superhuman strength, clairvoyance, clairaudience. There will sometimes be, or often there will be a change in their physical appearance. They don't look like the person they used to look like. Their eyes will be darker, sometimes completely black, where there's no white. There is usually a hatred for religious objects, a fear of clergy, a fear of crucifixes. Holy water burns them in a painful way. There will be other types of odd and inappropriate behaviors. And so, exorcism is the ritual of the church that is used to liberate a person from such an attack. And there is also a possibility of objects and places becoming infested with a demonic presence. And those infestations can be possessions in their own right. So possessions don't necessarily mean that it's always a person. It can sometimes be a possession of an object. Sometimes a possession of a house. And so an exorcism is utilized to break that attachment to the object. It's just a different type of exorcism. There's minor exorcisms, and then there's solemn exorcisms. Minor exorcisms are used for objects and places, and sometimes people, like in baptism, there is an exorcism that is performed before the rite of baptism is conducted, and that is also a minor exorcism. The prayer to St. Michael that many Catholics utilize is also considered to be a type of minor exorcism. But the solemn rite of exorcism, the one that you see in the movies, where the person's tied down in the bed and, the priest goes in with his assistant and they bring out the holy water and they start praying from the book. That is the solemn rite of exorcism, which is utilized for possession. So generally speaking, minor exorcisms can break everything up to possession. And then there's a stage, there's like a sub-stage of demonic oppression that is what I like to call pre-possession, where the person starts to show signs of the beginnings of a possession. And even if you can catch them at that stage, a minor exorcism can liberate them from that as well. But ultimately, what people don't understand about the ritual of exorcism is that it's a type of healing prayer, is what it really is. When you really break it down, it is a type of healing. It is to liberate a person from a spiritual crisis, and it is usually just the difference is this crisis is almost always demonically caused.
Well, how would you know the difference? I mean, like you told us signs of like when a human is being attacked. And when you talked about objects or homes, how would you determine if an exorcism was needed in that area?
Well, the objects themselves become very active. Touching them will usually make people extremely sick. There's usually an instant wave of nausea. Sometimes there is vomiting involved. And then those objects themselves become the key beacon for the center of activity. So when the object is identified, when it is removed, the problem goes away. And so some of the things that we do to identify the objects is that we ask the clients, we try to get down to the bottom during the interview stage, in the pre-assessment stage. We try to determine, when did the problems begin? And did you, are you a collector of antiques? Do you have any occult paraphernalia in your house? And we ask about this, and we hope that the client is in a state of desperation to the point that they are willing to be honest with us at the very least, because if they're not honest, we really can't help them as effectively as we would need to. But if they're honest, then they can tell us that, this happened, or, I've got this object here and we ask, does anything make you feel uncomfortable? Is there a room where where you feel that the center of activity is more active than it is in other places? And then we'll go in there and we will tear that room apart, and we'll get every object out of there. And we will douse it with holy water, and we will look for reactions. And if the object reacts to the holy water, then we typically know that we've got something there. And then at that point, we will move right into a minor exorcism of the object. And then just to be on the safe side, we will usually take the object if the client will let us, and in most cases they always do, and we will destroy the object. One time we actually had a sword. It was a Knights of Columbus sword, of all things. That was demonically attached. And we performed an exorcism on it, and then my team took the object and had it melted down, so that it would, be completely destroyed, and no chance that it could cause any problems in the future. But it's not always an easy thing. Sometimes these objects hide from us. Sometimes the demonic entity that's attached to these objects hides from us. And it can be a painstaking process to get it to reveal itself. So another thing that we utilize that is a lot different than what the larger canonical churches do, and being free of the red tape of canon law and the rules that the Vatican sets forth, is that we can utilize a more modernized worldview. So we have all of the latest paranormal equipment. We've got an SLS camera. We've got SB7 spirit boxes, SB11 now. We've got a Novelist 5. We conduct EVP sessions. I think I said SLS, right? We've got infrared cameras, full spectrum cameras, periscopes. We have EMF detectors. We have the gamut, you name it. And we use this in collaboration with spiritually sensitive people who are on the team, who are utilized for their specific talents, along with just the experience that comes with doing this work for an extended period of time and getting very sensitive to the presence of paranormal, spiritual, and demonic activity. That three things combined is what we use to be able to identify and locate these objects and get rid of them.
Wow.
Well, what's the criteria that you all use in deciding, which priest or whoever gives this responsibility to do exorcism?
Well, it's honestly it's up to their presiding bishop. So, unlike how the Vatican would do it, where they have literally thousands, tens of thousands of priests to pull from, to be able to look for those who have a special charism, being able to perform exorcism, it is actually a gift of the Holy Spirit. Not everyone has that gift. Not everyone's called to do it, and so there is a certain natural spiritual talent that is required, as well as being a priest, as well as being commissioned by their presiding bishop, their officiating bishop, to give them permission to be able to engage the ministry. But in a small system like the Independent Sacramental Movement, where we don't have the resources that the larger churches do, we have to be a little more liberal with working with people. So we do employ a lot of lay people to assist us with the investigation process, or at least being able to utilize them to the fullest extent that a lay person can be utilized in this type of ministry. But essentially, if a person, the people who come, we don't recruit in the sense that we don't go asking people, hey, why don't you become an exorcist for us? We don't do that, because that's futile, and it kind of restricts the power of the Holy Spirit to bring people to us. And so essentially we wait for them to find us. And when we get a request from someone who says they would like to work with us, 9 out of 10 times they're already working in exorcism ministry, or they have worked in deliverance ministry and want to up the game. And so they find us, and then we will look into, what their skill sets are, make sure that they have the permission of their bishop to perform exorcisms, and then we train them. We train them in our process, which gives them hopefully an added perspective. And particularly with the Atlanta division here, every division's run somewhat independently of each other. There is the governing body, which is the headquarters in California, but there's a lot of freedom amongst the different divisions to operate. And so here, particularly when a presiding bishop is in control, like I am for the Atlanta division, I have very strict protocols. So nobody comes to me, with a desire to be an exorcist, and is going to get into an exorcism overnight. It just doesn't work like that. They would have to be trained, and I would personally train them, and I would take them on in a type of mentorship program where they would shadow me and work with me through many cases before I would feel comfortable releasing them to lead an exorcism on their own. But yeah, it's a little less formal. It's a little less formal than what you're going to see in like the Roman Catholic Church.
Well, once you determine that an exorcism is needed, what are the steps and rituals of doing one?
Oh, so okay. So once an exorcism is, once it's determined that an exorcism is required, you're asking what are the steps that take place after that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, essentially, what we'll do is we go on the first stage is investigation. So we're in there and we're working with the client and we're investigating the environment, and let's say we've found exclusive evidence that yes, this is a demonic possession and this person needs an exorcism. So what we will do is everything that we do on the investigation is recorded. The team takes full notes of all of the instrumentation and the results that instrumentation performed that will help to validate the case. So at that point, what we do is we build a case on our level that states to the headquarters that an exorcism is going to be necessary here. So it's a little bit easier for me because I am a bishop and I run my own jurisdiction. So the headquarters gives puts a lot of support into that. Whereas it's not just a lay investigation team saying, I think we have a possession here, we might need help. But if a bishop of a jurisdiction decides that an exorcism may be required, typically the headquarters will go with that bishop's recommendation. So we're a little bit fortunate here because we do have that privilege as being our own jurisdiction. But we would still form a case that will show all the evidence that supports the claim that there is a genuine possession here and a need for an exorcism. All of the recordings, all of the evidence, the assessment gets sent to headquarters, and that gets evaluated by the chief exorcist and his team of psychiatrists, where they would review the tapes, they would look at the evidence, and they would have to sign off and say, yes, we agree that this is demonic and paranormal in nature and not mental health, not a mental health problem. And if they agree to that, then after a few months, it's usually the process here takes usually a couple months. Then they would come back to us and say that we have clearance to perform the exorcism, and then our spiritual resolution team would then go in, and we would arrange with the family to be home. We would arrange for the individual to be secured. So, if they're working with a medical doctor, we would like to have that doctor there with us, if possible, if the doctor's willing to be there for that. Same thing with a therapist or a psychiatrist. It's helpful because if the person gets out of control, we can safely manage their care on the physical level so that they don't get injured. And, of course, the greater threat is actually to the exorcism team because in most cases it's not the victim that is injured but the exorcist and his team. And so we will then go in and we'll restrain the victim so that they can't hurt themselves or anyone else. And then we will have part of the team outside in a different room, praying as a prayer team. They will be in a constant state of prayer for the success of the exorcism, and then the exorcist and his immediate team, which in a perfect situation would be made up of only clergy and maybe one or two family members of the victim, would be there, and then we would continue to work the exorcism until we see liberation, or release. The thing is, exorcisms, unlike what you see in the movies, are not instant fixes. They are gradual afflictions, and they will gradually depart. So the exorcism helps to weaken the demonic entity, but in many cases it requires several exorcisms before the person is fully liberated. And we're looking for those signs of release. And then once we've noticed those signs of release, then we can be finished. And then we will go into a sort of a post-treatment process where we encourage the person to come to church and receive the sacraments, particularly Eucharist. That's the most important thing for them to receive, either before or an exorcism or even after. But in most cases, before an exorcism, they're not able to receive Eucharist. They will reject anything that is holy or of God when they're in full possession. So sometimes we have to wait till after before we can sort of piece their spiritual life back together again. But yeah, that's essentially the process that we go through in order to get an exorcism approved. The rite of exorcism is long. It's made up of numerous different stages of exorcism prayer, as well as the Psalms, as well as other familiar prayers with the church. And the exorcist continues to perform these prayers until they start to see a reaction. And we want to look for a direct reaction in the demonic entity that has control over that victim. So if it's holy water that they respond negatively to, then we increase the use of holy water. If it's the sight of the crucifix that bothers them, then we will bring more crucifixes in. We want to get that demon as weak and as powerless as possible, and then we can make it vulnerable enough to give us its name. Once we have its name, we can begin the process of casting it out. And once we have that level of control, then we can start to see results and improvement.
Well, what's so important about getting their name? It
comes down to an old occult concept that goes back to the Western mystery tradition, in which derived most of its tenets from the church. Honestly, it used to be forbidden knowledge that was maintained by the church and behind the cloister and monasteries, and in various places within the church, but it got out and became the Western mystery tradition. And then part of it was the understanding of control of demons in the ceremonial magic, magic with a K, not stage magic, but this is actual conjuration, evocation, these occult practices that are used to communicate and control demonic forces. Are the power to do this exists within a sigil that is representative of the particular demon's name. So a demon's name is not a name in the sense that you and I have a name. It's not like Brian and Rodney. It's more than that. It's the essence of their beingness. And so when you have control, when you know that name, then you have control of the matrix that, the spiritual matrix that makes up that particular entity. And then you can manipulate it and you can control it. In the case of exorcism, you can expel it. And so it's the same thing. It's almost a type of evocation. Exorcism is a type of evocation.
Are there any certain rules that you all have to follow to go by to perform an exorcism?
Well, and there's a lot of protocols that we have. Like one of the things is we don't do exorcism haphazardly. From the things that I've already said, hopefully it was clear that we try to come up with every last explanation before we resort to exorcism as the solution. So, people think they hear the Order of Exorcists and, they hear that I'm an exorcist bishop, and they think that a lot of them, the critics in particular, think, I'm just walking around performing exorcisms everywhere I go. It's not like that at all. Exorcism is extremely rare. It's almost never needed. Usually these problems can be resolved through less severe means. And so, we want to be able to utilize the lesser solutions, the easier solutions, the less dramatic solutions before we resort to exorcism, which is sort of the last step. It's the last cause that will work. The last ditch effort to fix the problem, when everything else has proven itself to not be the cause. If it's possession, then really exorcism is the only thing that's going to work. But yeah, we try to. That's the number one protocol is you cannot be credulous in this work. You have to be and you have to be partially open-minded, because you'll miss things if you're not. But you want to be a critical thinker, and you want to be a little skeptical. You go into these because a lot of people who are schizophrenic with an active psychosis will often say that they hear demons. They'll often think that the voices that they hear are demonic, and it would be very harmful to a person who is schizophrenic to go in and perform an exorcism on them, because that's not the kind of help that they really necessarily need. And it only furthers their delusion, and you're trying to help them live. As a psychiatrist or a psychologist, you're trying to help them understand the nature of their delusions. And if you go in and say, "Oh, you hear demons? Well, let's do an exorcism," without any prerequisite exploration of other possibilities, then you're buying into that person's delusion, and you're doing more harm to them than good. So we have to be very careful. That's the first and foremost thing. As far as the other rules, one of the main rules is what the exorcist says goes. So when the exorcism begins, nobody should talk. Nobody should engage the demon. The demon will say all sorts of things through the mouth of the victim. They will know things about you. They will know your deepest, darkest sin that you've ever committed. which is part of the reason why, as an exorcist, you have to maintain as much of a holy life as possible, because every sin you've ever committed will be exposed during exorcism by the demons. They know your sins. They are present at your sins. They helped you commit those sins. And so they would love to shame you into thinking that you're not good enough. You're not powerful enough to be able to get rid of them. And so it's a manipulation game. And so it's extremely important that nobody engages the demon but the exorcist. And then the exorcist must only engage the demon for the purposes of getting its name. It should not engage in careless conversation. The exorcist should not ask curious questions about its nature, or about the nature of the demonic realm, or God knows what else people can think up about asking it. If you had a demon that you could ask questions to, I'm sure you could probably think of about 20 or 30 questions that you'd like to ask. You have to get those things out of your mind, and you have to stick to the focus of what you're there to do. It's a war. It's a battle, and you're not there to be distracted. But yet the demonic entity is going to do everything it can to distract you, and particularly to make you feel incompetent and inferior. And so, when you're in that stage, one of the most important rules is to stick to the rubric. And so we use the Roman ritual, which is the old form of exorcism. In fact, the Roman Catholic Church doesn't even use that form anymore. They've got a modernized form that has come under some criticism because it changed some key things to it. But we use the older, the pre-Vatican II Roman ritual, and we find that that's an extremely effective rite in order to perform. And that has its own set of rules within the rubric. You go through those stages. Well, another thing that's very important is maintaining absolute vigilance in prayer. So you don't go into an exorcism after, getting drunk and partying the night before. Hopefully, before you even begin the exorcism, you have spent about 72 hours in constant prayer, 72 hours of in the sanctuary, in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, and having received the Eucharist each of those days. And so you're constantly preparing yourself for the engagement with this thing, because the demonic entity will start attacking you long before you even arrive at the house of the victim. It gets into your life. In fact, there was one case that we went on where, it was just straight out of the movie. But you remember in, I think it was Amityville Horror, where the priest came to bless the house and he got swarmed by flies. That actually happened to me in my own house the night before an investigation that ended up resulting in requiring a minor exorcism of an object, actually two objects. Wow. My house became infested with 200, 300 flies. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it does happen. It does happen. Just like, it becomes, it's almost like right out of the movies sometimes. Not always as dramatic as the movies, but, it's all based on truth. There is a realm of truth to some of the drama that you see on TV.
Well,
wow.
What exactly is a demon or a demonic entity?
Well, that's a really good question. I can give you, there's two answers to it. And the most intriguing part of this is that they're not, they're contradictory. The answers that I'm going to give you are actually going to contradict each other. But hopefully it'll make sense when I explain what I mean. So in order to answer this, let's first start off by talking about the different types of demons that there are. Because some people just think that there's angels and demons and nothing else. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. And in this work, you'll find that the universe is filled. It's filled with every possible non-corporeal form that you could even imagine. It's filled with various types of creatures that would be categorized as paranormal. But it's just paranormal because we don't understand it or normally interact with it at the level of vibration of which a human being exists. But for those who are able to change their vibratory rate and perceive what is known as the spiritual world, they will tell you that it is populated with all sorts of creatures, spiritual creatures that are present. And so sometimes things get called demons when they're really not demons. So let's break them down. So there's 4 types of demons, or what we would call demons, although not some of them are erroneously called that, as you'll see in a moment. And then I'll explain to you what demons are. The first is the fallen angel. Now, this is your classic Christian, Judeo-Christian concept of a demon. You know, there is, you've heard of the story of Adam and Eve. You've heard of the battle in heaven that took place prior to the Garden of Eden, where Lucifer disobeyed God and fell from grace, and some angels sided with Lucifer and went with Lucifer, and those fallen angels are became the demons that populate the demonic realm as the church now understands it. Now, that's a metaphor. I'm not going to try to get into this idea. I don't want people to think that this is a literal story. It's a metaphor for a spiritual event that happened, but because the human mind is quite limited in its ability to understand the ineffable things of God, we have to come up with stories in order to express these things in a way that human beings can understand them. So the story of the war in heaven and the fall from grace and Lucifer and the demons and all, and the fallen angels, that's just a way of trying to express to the human mind a concept that it happened on a spiritual level that is beyond the human brain's ability to understand. So I want to make sure that that's clear. So when we talk about these things, we're talking about the theology, which is an analogy of a spiritual reality. So it doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that this is the best that we can come up with to express what occurred. We couldn't get into it any deeper than that because we don't have the vocabulary for it and we don't have the brain capacity to understand it. So the first stage is the fallen angel. Now, in reality, that is the only true demon. There is no such thing as a demon outside of the fallen angels in the Judeo-Christian worldview. But things that fall into the under the demonic umbrella, but are not fallen angels. And so sometimes what gets called demons is what is known as an elemental, or what I like to call a primordial spirit. Now, these are non-corporeal entities that existed, that I should say pre-existed creation. In fact, they were part of the creative process that brought the universe into existence. But they are more ancient than anything that exists within the universe because they partially exist outside of it. And these are spiritual realities that are absolutely neutral. They are not evil. They are not good. While they were created by God technically, they were not created with the intent to produce a good result or a bad result. They just exist. And because they are perfectly neutral forces, they can be manipulated by those clever enough to interact with them to do wonderful things or horrible things. Sometimes when human beings come in contact with them accidentally, the experience can be nothing short of a demonic attack. It will feel, for all intents and purposes, to be a demonic attack, even though it is not a fallen angel. Most of these elemental forces have an intelligence that is comparable to a mosquito. You're not dealing with something that can think. You're dealing with something that is pure instinct. And so just like I said this, I say this many times, and people who listen to me will hear me say it again. It's so important to get this point across. Just like a mosquito, comes at, you're walking through the jungle and a mosquito, latches onto you and starts, sucking your blood. It's not doing that maliciously. It's not doing that to attack you. It's doing that because it's its instinct to survive. It lives off of the life force of other people. And these elemental creatures do the same thing, only on a pure non-corporeal spiritual level. And so, it can make people very sick when they when they come in contact with these forces accidentally. And it does happen. They are part of nature. And so if you happen to build your house on a piece of land that has some of these elemental forces present, then you can have all sorts of havoc take place in and around your property that will feel every bit demonic to you. But it's important to make this distinction because the solution is very different than it would be if it's a fallen angel, which would be less common. The third class of demon, which is also not a true demon, is what we call created demons. Now, these are thought forms. In fact, I just got done working a case this week, in fact, where the actual infestation was a created demon. Now, what they're also known in the Western mystery tradition as thought forms. This is essentially what is actually being conjured when a person engages in conjuration, evocation, and ceremonial magic. They are able to produce out of the energy that they can control through occult means a demonic entity, for all intents and purposes, that can do its will. So a black magician, for example, can conjure one of these demonic thought forms and send them out to attack an enemy and wreak havoc in that enemy's life. Curses work on this principle. It's not the energy of the black magician or witch that performs the curse that makes the curse possible. It's the ability to produce a semi-sentient demonic entity out of the ether that is used to attach to a person and thus create a curse that gets integrated into that person's life. And so, again, this is an important distinction because that in itself has a different solution if that ends up being what it is. And there's all sorts of different ways that can manifest, more than we have time to talk about. But that's the third type. And then there's the fourth type, which is absolutely not a demon at all. It's what we call a wrathful spirit. And a wrathful spirit is actually a person who was a human being who died. But these are people who die in a state of vengeance, a state of absolute hatred. Sometimes it's actually because they were a victim of a murder, and their last instinct of hate and over their murderer becomes their reality after they pass. And that's one thing that's an important thing to understand about the afterlife, is that some people, I think that, ghosts and spirits and, they kind of like exist in this invisible non-corporeal reality, but they think and behave like we do. Well, that's not true. They actually don't have the ability to think like a human being anymore. And the reason for that is that your powers of cognition come from your brain, and your brain is part of your body, and your body dies and rots away with the rest of the corpse after a person dies. So your powers of cognition, your powers of consciousness, you lose after death, but your faculties of awareness remain intact, because part of your awareness is actually non-corporeal and spiritual in nature. And that becomes the essence of what people have identified to be spirits and ghosts. But the difference between the way we think and the way they operate is that we have logical, rational faculties that our brain affords us. Spirits and ghosts do not. They have pure instinct, and that's it. And so if you die in a state of vengeance, if you die in a state of hatred, then that becomes your reality after you die. That becomes all you are. That instinct to hate is all that remains. And that, for all intents and purposes, again, becomes a demonic force in the lives of those that are left behind. And so suicides are common wrathful spirits, which is why, suicide is never a good choice, because your chances of becoming a wrathful spirit are exponentially greater if you are in a state of, a mental distress where you could actually carry out a suicide where you're going against the very instinct to survive. I mean, that's a very special type of despair, and it doesn't bode well in the afterlife. And so those are the four classifications. Those are the four types of quote-unquote demons that we will encounter, and each one of those will have a different solution. Exorcism is not used for wrathful spirits. We conduct a completely different protocol for that, which is very effective, but it is nonetheless something that needs to be understood when we go in, because more often than not, when a person thinks they have a demon in their house, I can guarantee you it's almost always a wrathful spirit. It is not a demon, not a true demon anyway, not a fallen angel is what I mean to say.
Right.
So
which
that
one would you consider? Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just thinking though, where would it fall into category? How would it fall into the occult side where people use occult things like with the Ouija board? Did they say they've conjured up these demons? That would be like the third one, right?
In many cases, yes. The Ouija board thing is almost always a thought form or created demon. Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, that's not to say that fallen angels couldn't utilize that, but you have to remember one thing about satanic forces. If you're talking about a satanic demon, which is the only true demon, okay, they are creatures too. They are part of the creation, which means they are not omnipresent. They are not omniscient. Because if you believe that the devil is as powerful as God, you're really not a Christian anymore. What you are is a dualist. And Christianity is not a dualistic religion. It is you would have to go to show an example. Zoroastrianism is a dualistic religion, because in Zoroastrianism, the good God and the evil God are in constant competition, and both are equally powerful. But in Christianity, God is the supreme power in the universe. Nothing even comes close to his level of power. And so Satan and his demons do not possess the qualities that God possesses. So that means that they are limited in their ability to inflict us, which means that if you're not doing anything that's going to get the attention of a demon, chances are, with the 7 billion people on this planet, you're going to fly under the radar and never really come into direct contact with a fallen angel. So Ouija boards typically, because there's so many people playing with them, I mean, let's face it, it's considered a game. It's a board game. You can go to the store and buy it. It's made by Parker Brothers. And, they've got witches boards, and people, craft their own special kinds. There's too many people using them. So the chances of one being able to bring in an actual satanic fallen angel is very low. But the chances of producing and conjuring a thought form out of the expectations of the user, particularly if the person is using it in a state of fear, that fear can manifest as an actual demonic entity, and it will behave and operate as if it is a completely sentient demonic force, and it has to be dealt with on that level, and it can wreak havoc on people's lives. So really, honestly, I would never tell people that it's, go out and get your Ouija boards and have fun, because, the reality of it is the real actual danger to Ouija boards is the fear surrounds them. And when people use them in a state of fear, their fear is what conjures up the thought form that can actually manipulate their lives in a completely foreign and independent external way. So, the Ouija board itself is really not the dangerous thing. The real dangerous thing is the fear of the user. So if you can't control your own sense of fear, you have no business playing with the occult to begin with, let alone Ouija boards, because it will take on a world of its own. It takes on a mind of its own, which is how they operate, how they work. And yes, it will conjure most of the time a created demon, which gets me to answering the question. I know that this has been a long answer, but it requires a lot of prerequisite knowledge to be able to understand what I'm about to say. What I've given you in those 4 types of demonic entities is what I like to call the conventional understanding of what a demon is. So you could give that information and accurately portray what those things are to somebody who would ask what a demon is. But it's not going to service an exorcist if he doesn't understand what demons are on an absolute level. So the conventional knowledge is great because that becomes part of the theological story that we were talking about earlier. And that's necessary because, again, we're dealing with ineffable realities of the divine life. We're dealing with the ineffable qualities of God that cannot be understood by man. So we have to have a conventional language, a conventional vocabulary to understand these things. But there is an absolute reality that has nothing at all to do with the conventional attributes that I just shared with you. And that is, at the most fundamental level, all demons are archetypal forms that are literally create fractures in a person's consciousness that takes over the ordinary operations of that person's mind. And so on the most basic level, what you are dealing with is the power of the psyche. And it begins and ends right there. But that's an absolute reality. It is not how it plays out in the conventional world, which is the world that we live in. So we're not going to see the psychic fracture. We're going to see demons, and we're going to experience demons, and we're going to be able to measure with actual scientific equipment the presence of paranormal forces. I can't tell you how many apparitions we've caught. I can't even tell you how many things that we've caught in full spectrum, infrared, and all sorts of things, and manifestations at will, voices, people talking to us, demonic voices talking to us. So at the conventional level, that's where it plays out. So it doesn't service the layman to understand the absolute reality of it, but it is necessary for the exorcist. And it's necessary for paranormal investigators that when you are dealing with these spiritual forces, you are dealing with other sides of your own psyche. And so you might say, but wait a second, Bishop, that kind of contradicts. I mean, are they external or are they all in your head? Well, it's both. They're all in your head and they're all external because guess what? What you think is your consciousness is actually let me put it this way. Let me try to make this a little bit easier to understand. What you think are the thoughts in your head are actually signals that are being sent out that your brain is receiving, like an antenna, or almost like a satellite dish that's receiving a signal from outer space. Think of the spiritual world as the non-corporeal sides of the cosmos. And it's sending out all sorts of signals, some of which we're tuned into. Our brains are like giant receptors for that information. We pick up those signals, and then we play them out in our lives. And we think that we're the ones thinking those thoughts, and we think that we're the ones living out those lives, when in reality, it is a projection of a spiritual reality that is happening in a completely different reality than this one. This is just a stage for the performance to play out the story. And that is essential to understanding when we're dealing with the realities of the paranormal, so that we don't lose ourselves in the fear of these objects of power that on the conventional level seem that they are so far and beyond us, but at the absolute level, we have complete control over. But if you don't understand it on both levels, you will not be effectively able to work with them, and then they can do you harm. So I hope that answers the question.
Oh, yeah. Well, it answered it, but it also gave me more questions now. But we'll have to, I'll have to have you back on, because 2 hours is not enough time. Yeah, do a part 2, yes. I do have one question that's troubled me most of my life. Well, it's a series of questions, but okay. Everyone knows, and what we've been taught, that God knows everything, the future, the past, and the present, and He supposedly created everything that we know or don't know, even different levels of reality or parallel universes, or however you want to say that. So one of my biggest questions is, if God knows all this, why did He create evil? And why would God create angels that would turn against Him if He knew that they would turn against Him, especially Lucifer? And this goes into Adam and Eve. He created man wanting us to serve Him, but actually He knew that we would, by giving us free will, that we would turn our back on Him. And, well, not everybody, but, and also, with the tree of knowledge, why would you even put that in the Garden of Eden if you, it's like putting a jar of candy in front of a kid and say, don't touch that.
Yeah, I've often said, the story of Adam and Eve really seems to be unfair when you think about it from the theological vantage point, because it's not unlike, having a murderer in your house, and you as the parent, let's say the parent is God, and you've got a child, which we'll say is Adam. You've got 2 children, Adam and Eve, and you've got a murderer in your house. The house being the garden, and the murderer being the serpent. And it seems kind of questionable that you would say, okay, well, guess what? I'm going to leave for the day, and you're just going to stay here with the serpent, and just don't do anything he tells you to do. But you're dealing with like the equivalent of 2-year-old children, where they're easily manipulated, and they don't have the foundation to be able to outsmart something like that. So why would God let that happen? Why would He put us? It almost seems like as though we were set up to fall. And the answer to that is we were. We actually were. And that has plagued, of course, theologians going back, because it created a split in the early church between the Proto-Orthodox, which became Roman Catholicism, and Eastern Orthodoxy, and Gnosticism, which was eventually almost completely snuffed out, except for little tiny branches that continued to exist for a period of time. Some still do, actually, but most of ancient Gnosticism is gone, and that's because they rejected this idea that a really good God would do something like that and set man up to fail. But let's look at it from the conventional standpoint, which is the Judeo-Christian context, the one I operate from, and the one that most people that are listening to the show probably are operating from, whether they're Christians or not, because one way or another, if you lived in Western society, you've been brought up with this understanding to some degree. The understanding that you have of evil is really coming from the Judeo-Christian worldview. It's not coming from the East, I can tell you that, because Buddhists and Hindus have completely different concepts of good and evil than what Judeo-Christians do, as far as like Judaism and Christianity, and even Islam would fall into that category as well. So let's break this down a little bit, and I'll try to explain it. There's a hymn in church that gets sung every now and then. It's called "Oh Happy Fault." And I couldn't even tell you the lyrics of it. I don't know them off the top of my head. But what it's referring to, the happy fault that it's referring to, is actually the fall of Adam and Eve. And the reason that it is considered a happy fault is that it is through that action that the Savior, Jesus Christ, was able to come into the world. So think of it from this vantage point. We've already established that Adam and Eve, and again, remember, this is not history. This is a theological story to convey an ineffable spiritual reality of an event that happened on a spiritual level that we as human beings cannot understand or comprehend if we were to try to understand it at that level. So we've got a story that we can work with. So that story is the book of Genesis. And that gives us the story of Adam and Eve falling from grace. They disobey God. The serpent tempts them. They eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And they were told that they could eat anything except that fruit. And the serpent tells them, but if you eat this fruit, the way he tricks them into it is that if you eat this fruit, then you will be like God. And you will know, you will have knowledge, which is the whole gnosis thing that comes from Gnosticism, And so it sounds pretty good, and they take the serpent's advice, and that brings death into the world. Prior to that, Adam and Eve were created to be immortal. The creation was created perfectly, but it was made imperfect by that action. That imperfection, however, is what gets us to a state from being literally infant children, because Adam and Eve were operating at the cognitive level of a toddler, if even that good, and they had no ability to really engage a relationship with God on any level outside of being cared for. There was no intimacy. The intimacy between God and Adam and Eve existed between Adam and Eve, in the sense that all they could participate in that was intimate would have been their own physical experience with each other. But God would have been completely excluded from that because of the lack of understanding and the lack of wisdom that came with the ignorance of not knowing the nature of God in the spiritual world and the actual reality of their condition that the serpent gives them. So what ends up happening here is that it is by the very act of Adam and Eve falling from grace that God drafts his plan to correct the universe through the intimate union of man with his son, Jesus Christ, which is where the rest of the theology of salvation comes from. In the church, that's called soteriology, the study of salvation, the theology of salvation. And so the way that is achieved is not from some all-powerful, ineffable God that is so far and above his creation that we really can't interact with him on any meaningful level because we're just that inferior. But now God becomes man. in the incarnation, which we are about to celebrate in the Christmas season that's quickly approaching. And the incarnation is, one of the wonderful theological lines that I say often, and people who hear me will hear me say this a lot too, is God becomes man so that man can become God, which gets us back to that little story in the Garden of Eden. Oh, if you eat this fruit, I know you're not supposed to, but if you eat this fruit, you will become like God and have knowledge of all things good and all things evil. You'll be able to see things his way, but it brings death into the world because if you ate of the fruit, the tree of life, then you had immortality. But if you ate of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, it brings death because we're not capable of harnessing that power to know. But now we do know because that is the result of eating the fruit. And so the way that this gets rectified is God comes down to our level. He takes on. This is what it means when St. Paul says that he who knew no sin became sin for us. That's what that means. Is he took on the sinful flesh of humanity, even though he had no sin. He still took on the deficiency of human flesh in order to save us and to interact with us on an intimate level now, because now he could relate to us and we could relate to him because now he's a man. We can touch him. We can talk to him. We can experience him directly. And then through the power of his teaching, power of the sacraments of the church that he leaves behind, we get elevated up and become God, which is something that could never occur in the original condition of the perfection that existed in the Garden of Eden. It was completely perfect, but completely devoid of the intimate union that we could never have with God. We would have existed for all eternity in a physical reality, an earth-like reality, with each other, but never being able to enter into complete and perfect union with God, which now we can through Jesus Christ, which only happened because we fell from grace, because there's no need for a Savior if we don't fall. Now, what am I really saying here? Because you're saying, I'm still giving you a theological story, and a lot of critics are going to look at that and say that still doesn't make good sense, because why couldn't he have arranged it so that we could be perfect enough to enter into union with him without having to go through the rigmarole of all of this pain and suffering and death that resulted from the events that are described in the Garden of Eden, which, again, I want to remind everyone, this is not history. It's an ineffable spiritual reality that's being conveyed through metaphor and analogy. What that means is, now let's look at it at a metaphysical level. Let's take a step away from the theology for a moment and just look at things metaphysically. I can give you a really easy example. I've used it before. It seems to be pretty effective. I don't know if you've ever gotten into photography. I don't know if you've ever, actually developed real film. Not too many people are into that anymore now with digital cameras. But, even digital cameras, there's a similar thing with Photoshop. If I take a picture, okay, whether it be with real film or with, a digital camera, and I go to develop it, I have to set, using the equipment to develop that picture, I have to set the contrast. If I apply too much contrast, the picture's going to go all dark, and you won't be able to see it. It will be the picture will be lost. If I don't apply enough contrast, the picture will be all washed out, and the page will still appear white, and you still won't see the picture. It is only through a perfect balance of the lights and the darks that we're able to experience the picture. So the truth of evil has nothing to do with evil. It has everything to do with the polarity that makes reality possible. In other words, you could never experience love and enjoy it and appreciate it and understand it if you didn't understand what it was like to be without love. You would never understand what it meant to be secure if you've never experienced the risk of insecurity. We need that polarity in order to comprehend our reality, because without it, we get lost in bliss. It's like operating a battery. If you had two positive ends on a battery, it's not going to produce a charge. You need to have a positive end and a negative end to produce that charge. So the reality of evil, best way to describe evil is the absence of the good. Not the opposite of good, it's the absence of good. And so these shadow realms, these shadow places that are created, are what cast the contrast that allows us to experience reality. So Adam and Eve, in the perfect condition of their original state, was so perfect it was beyond experience. They were operating on completely, again, we've talked about the instinctual level that spirits operate. They were identical in that respect. It would be almost like creating androids that have no self-awareness, no true sentience, but they can simulate it through artificial intelligence. They can simulate the reality of a human being, but they cannot ever experience the reality of a human being. It required their fall from grace in order to create the fracture in the universe that created the distinction that allows them to be able to experience who they are, because now they can look at themselves from the outside, whereas before they were all that was. And that's a necessary aspect to the story of creation, because creation is not about let there be light. Creation is about every process that happens from let there be light all the way to the end of time, when it resolves itself in a state of perfection. With the differences, we return to the Garden of Eden. We return to that state of perfection. But the difference is now we can experience it. Again, another way of looking at it from a theological vantage point is there has never been a figure in the New Testament that has been more demonized, outside of Lucifer, of course, but a human being has never been more demonized in the New Testament than that of Judas Iscariot, the apostle that betrayed Jesus Christ to the chief priest and made it possible for him to be arrested by revealing his location on the night of what the church refers to as Holy Thursday, after the Last Supper, when he was apprehended. And Judas gets paid 30 pieces of silver for that. And, of course, Judas eventually becomes so distraught over this, he hangs himself. He actually kills himself. And so a lot of theologians have wondered over the years whether or not Judas is in hell. To date, the church has never declared anyone to be in hell. It will declare those that are in heaven, which we call saints. But, excuse me, sorry. But the church has never said this person's in hell. So we don't know. We don't know what happened to Judas Iscariot. But he's been hated for centuries for the crime of handing over the Savior to those that would put him to death. But if Judas Iscariot had not betrayed him, he might not have died on the cross. And it is by the blood of the cross that salvation was brought into the world, because it is by the consumption of the blood of Christ that man is made immortal and can engage the immortality that was originally his condition. So what I'm trying to say to answer your question is that it's not as easy as simply saying God had the foresight that it was all going to go wrong, so why didn't he do something about it? Because the answer is he did do something about it. Whatever cosmic fracture occurred that is metaphorically portrayed in the story of the fallen angels, whatever that was, is being resolved and rectified through man, which makes us the most important creatures in the entire creation and why God loves us so much. It also explains why Satan hates us so much, because it is by our very existence that we undo everything that he attempted to do before we were even in existence. This is before the creation of man that this occurred. So it's a process of salvation, and the theology doesn't do it full justice, Rodney. Again, we're dealing with ineffable truths that don't translate well to human understanding, because we tend to have human logic and we try to apply human logic to the things of God, and it doesn't work that way at the true absolute level. We have to, and this is one of the things that you learn very early on in both Christian and Buddhist mysticism, is that you have to make peace with the contradictions of the realizations that you attain to. And the more those realizations are revealed to you, the more contradictory they become, and the more troubled we become, because our brains want to make sense of it, but the brain will never make sense of it, because it can only look at it through the one-dimensional perspective of human consciousness and not through the multi-dimensional, infinite-dimensional perception of the divine life. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but the best that I can do is to say evil is a necessary component to the overall plan that brings creation into its full mature state. We would have never seen that mature state if it weren't for the conditions of evil that made them possible.
Well, I think that's the best answer anybody's ever gave me. You know, it just, to me, it's like the yin and the yang. We got to have
both.
That's
exactly what it is. Yep, it's exactly what it is. It's a perfect way of putting it. In Buddhism, they don't call it good and evil. It's called the active principle and the passive principle. And so they work together because if you're not in homeostasis, you die. Look at your body. It maintains, if you're in good health, your body maintains a perfect 98.6 degrees. That is an essential number. That figure is essential to normal operations of your physiology. If it goes off just a couple of degrees, you have a fever. If you go too high, if you go too low, you're in hypothermia. If it goes out 5 degrees in either direction, you're at risk for death. Homeostasis is necessary. So, you know, it's implied, Rodney, in the Old Testament, because if you notice, the devil doesn't work as in opposition to God. He's actually part of God's court. He's known. In fact, the word Satan means accuser, right? It's like it's sort of like the person who it's like the prosecuting attorney at a case. Satan was the one that would present all of your faults to God, and then judgment would be issued. He only started becoming this direct adversary to God in the New Testament when people started to think more dualistically, and that's a product of the apocalyptic stage of religious development that occurred around the turn of where we went from BC to AD. It's around I'd say about 3 BC is when people started to get very apocalyptic, and the dualism came in, where they started to see that there was a good force and an evil force, and in reality, the things that you don't like you call evil, and the things that you do like you call good. You know, I mean, look at the worst things that man can do. Look at war, look at murder, look at rape, look at child sexual abuse. I mean, these are among the worst things that man can do. Okay, and in reality, they are just actions, but we disdain them so much. We have such hatred for those actions that we inflict those actions with the personification of evil. And then look at the things that we do that are wonderful, like compassion, charity, seeing a homeless person on the street and maybe taking them in and giving them food and getting them on their feet. Look at the things that people do that are good. We admire these things because these feel good. These support life. See, rape and death and murder and child abuse, those destroy life. And so things that are contrary to life, things that are compatible with death, we call evil. Things that are compatible with life and support life and create wholesome progressions in life that lead towards a positive stage of evolution, then we call good. But in reality, it's all just neutral. It's all just energy. It's just we categorize them and we classify them because we tell ourselves stories. And so the story of murder is evil. The story of compassion is good. But never lose sight of the fact that they're still just neutral stories. It's how we respond to them that we decide which direction they go, whether or not we want to call it evil or we want to call it good. So in reality, Rodney, the ultimate absolute answer to your question is that good and evil are the creation of man. They don't really exist in the divine life.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time, Bryan, and I do, sir. I appreciate you coming on the show. We got to set up a part 2, if you don't mind, after the first of the year, because I got a ton more questions for you.
We'll write them down, and I'll be more than happy to come back and answer as many as we can.
Okay. Well, before we go, do you have like a website or a place where people could go if they got any questions or comments or any way to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. Anybody who is in spiritual crisis and resides within the Atlanta, Georgia area, and that, like I said, about a 2-hour driving radius around that we cover. And sometimes if you're able to support the ministry, we can actually go outside of that jurisdiction as long as I can, pay for my team to travel and the extra costs that come with leaving. You just go to esotericcatholic.org. That's esotericcatholic.org. Or you can go to Nicolean.org. That's NICHOLEAN.org. They're both the same website, just 2 different URLs. And that brings you to my church in Atlanta, Georgia, where you can go to see all the different types of things that we do. And if you go there and you click on Order of the Exorcist, and Order of Exorcist will take you to the Atlanta Division's special page where you can request an investigation. So if you have any kind of issues, anything that you feel, might be paranormal in nature and you're not sure how to get rid of it, we can absolutely help. We have a perfect success rate in this regard. And I don't say that lightly. We put a lot of time and effort into being able to fix these things. We are very professional. We are very discreet. We will maintain your confidentiality, and we will take care of it completely free of charge. But like I said, we operate strictly on your generous donation. So if you believe in what we do, we can definitely use the support because we never have enough money to do everything that we would like to do for this ministry. If you are outside of the Atlanta, Georgia area and need help, then you can go to orderofexorcists.com. That's the main site for the order. And there you can fill out a contact form for the other locations that will get to the other jurisdictions out there. And of course, there is always, if you would like to contact the church directly, you can even call us at 207-370-9077. That's the office line for the church. That's 207-370-9077. And somebody from my team will be back in touch with you. You can also email us at office@nicolean.org as well. So there's lots of ways to reach us. We have a Facebook page. You can just type in Holy Nicolean Catholic Church on Facebook, and you can find us there. You can ask your questions. And ultimately, though, the best way is to just go to the website and fill out the intake form, because if you call us, that's just what we're going to tell you to do anyway. We can't come and see you until we have your intake form.
Okay, Bishop, I appreciate it again for you coming on, and We got about 50 seconds left, so I'm going to next week because of Thanksgiving, and I hope everybody has a good Thanksgiving, and we'll be back on with Steve Hudgens Jr., and everybody be safe and enjoy your upcoming holiday. Robin?
Night, y'all.
Again, Bishop, I'll send you the info, and we'll set up another part.
Sounds good. I look forward to talking with you again.
Okay, thank you, sir. You have a good night.
You do the same.
And now, insurance-minded speeches from Geico.
It's a common expression, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. However, what if the horse's mouth is filled with useful insurance tools? This is the exact case with the Geico app. Yes, the app is free and therefore a gift horse. However, look inside the app and behold, emergency roadside assistance, digital ID cards, bill pay. Get the Geico app. Look it in the mouth. Get amazing services. Thank you.